In our last video on the reality self-simulation principle, we discussed the technical basis for why and how reality has to configure itself as a simulation. In this video, we're going to go deeper and see the actual kind of deep structure behind what's going on with respect to reality. So reality simulates by, to, and for its inhabitants. This is what we talked about in the last video, this participatory anthropic principle, that the quantum information being provided by our observation is what is parameterizing, what is being represented to everyone across all of time. You have this non-local influence whereby all of reality is quantized according to the secondary utility of all of its tellers across time. So reality simulates through, as we discussed, the metaformal system and intrinsic language which reflects the structure of heaven and earth, this potentialization and actualization, towards an intrinsic utility, the intrinsic utility of 5 telic identification operations, that of the primary syntactor, secondary syntactor, tertiary syntactor, as well as the primary and secondary tellers, who are God and humans respectively. So it's a giant Romanesco broccoli. It's self-similar at every structure. It's fractal-like. And so if you think about this, what is reality's cognition of itself like? Because we've talked about in past videos, the reality and the universe is like God's mind, and it has the sentience through the self-awareness of human beings and other observer participants who are aware of themselves within this. And so you think, if you abstract that out, God has to have an even more powerful and general kind of sentience. And how is God actually experiencing reality? He's not experiencing it he's both experiencing in this global way, but also through the distributed cognition inherent at every point in the universe. So God is experiencing a general kind of cognition. The generalized cognition is actually time, or telic recursion. It's this self-calling. It's all of the little points and nodes in reality are calling on one another to just, they're like neurons in God's mind to have this general kind of awareness. This is, in Neoplatonism, this is called the nous. It's the light by which the one sees itself through this spatial extension, through this physical world, which is authored by the world soul as an extension of the structure of the one. So it's all contained within one identity, and it's this constant potentialization and actualization for the simulation of reality. So you have this syndipionesis, whereby this hology, whereby the syntax of what allows reality to simulate itself inheres at every point. There's this distributed cognition and telic recursion, as well as information embedded within every little quanta of reality. And reality is not quantized in terms of matter or energy or strings even. It's quantized in terms of syntactors, in terms of syntactic operators which are transforming the global language, the metaformal system, the intrinsic language of reality, so it's transforming that to achieve sort of spatial extension according to these 5 telic identification functions. And so there's both incoversion and coinversion. Both this language, this self-processing, self-configuring language, which is this metalinguistic meta-object, which is the reality simulation itself, that inheres through incoversion. That syntax inheres in every little syntactic operator, every little point. Every point particle in reality has this global syntax, but also the language is defined as the whole of all of these syntactic operators, all of these tertiary, secondary, and primary syntactors. If you take all of those together and they're embedded and have these interlocking utility functions, that is reality's identity. It's distinguishing between self and non-self according to each of these. So just as the points are embedded in the whole is also embedded in the points. It's self-dual. And so you can't ultimately separate this is the correspondence principle of Niels Bohr. You can't separate the microscopic and macroscopic level of reality. You have to be able to reproduce classical physics at the quantum scale and vice versa. And so it's this generative grammar. This is what Noam Chomsky talks about, is that you have this base syntax, and then you have all these different identification events, and that is transforming the global structure in order to generate a representation according to the utility, the intrinsic value structure of the universe. It's actually towards a teleology, towards an intrinsic goal and purpose which it has set for itself. This is Carl Jung's definition of teleology. It is the intrinsic striving towards a goal and a series of directed aims seeking to fulfill themselves. So this is the self-potentialization, is reality is this hologic self-simulative scratch pad, which is comparing these various functions and seeing how it can be most utile in terms of its identity to know and understand itself. This is something which Jeremiah talks about in the Bible. He says, do not boast because you're rich. Don't boast because you're smart. Don't boast because you have a great and chiseled body. Just kidding. Don't boast about any of these things. But the ultimate telos of reality, both at the human and cosmic level, is to know and to understand God. So it's this conspansive hological processing whereby things are internally expanding through this spatial contraction. So you see this alternation between information and which is then processed by this global cognition, this global telic recursion, in order to have these processing and display functions. So the display function is the surface structure of reality, S sigma, and the processing is all this other stuff which goes into what is actually displayed. You can think about this like a computer. I can look here, and on my monitor I have a bunch of different pixels which have a certain form and shape, which displaying certain colors and light, etc. But what actually goes in to those pixels? And you can think, well, the infrastructure of the computer, the software of the broadcasting software I'm using, and the creative and product design teams, and all of this intentionality, even the industrial history of society, what made the computer, etc. All this is going into this one simple state. And so the surface structure of reality, that's just the tip of the iceberg, and not the tip of the iceberg relative to the rest of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg relative to the entire ocean. There's much more deep structure than what is being terminally displayed. So the reality self-simulation is quantized in terms of these syntactic operators, which are able to have this distributed processing for reality, is able to have this generalized cognition whereby the universe can be made aware of itself and have very, very deep structure which allows it to simulate itself in a utile way. And so you think about this rate, it's almost like a chemical reaction. If you take enough syntactic operators which have this intrinsic teleology, and you have large numbers, and then as a function of that telos, that intrinsic purpose embedded in its structure, eventually you'll get tellers, you'll get human beings who are actually capable of experiencing that reality self-simulation. And that is ultimately who the simulation is for. So this allows for semantic exploration this is what humans are doing, where exploring the different possibilities, and God is defining, extending, and reinforcing his syntax according to what is most utile to the most secondary tellers across time. So there's this semantic exploration through God not determining everything. We don't live in a deterministic universe, we live in a generative universe, whereby our teleology, our response to our environment is what reality is quantized in terms of. We can enact timelines according to our soul, according to our relation to reality as this generalized spirit, this global self, if I want to predict everything in the universe, this is actually undecidable. Even with this is what Gödel proved, is that no formal system can be totally contained within any. This is that no discipline can be totally explained within the formal description of itself. So this is why human beings are so necessary to reality, because there's both this global structure which is determining everything and doesn't allow it chokes off everything, and this tertiary structure which is determining nothing. It has no intrinsic teleology, and then you have to have a mediating intermediate level whereby reality can actually do something which is important, which isn't predetermined or not determined. It's self-determined, and thus it can establish a conception of itself. So this is secondary tellers. We are able to, the syntax of the reality self-simulation adheres in our mind, and thusly we are able to conform and respond to that, and then reality itself defines, extends, and reinforces its structure according to what is the metaphysical pattern which is creating truthful and good order at the secondary level of utility, at the agentive level. So we're agents in the matrix. So, but not in a bad way, not like in the movie. So, let the light shine forth in the darkness. May the peace of our Father in heaven be upon you. Like and subscribe. Peace.